Welcome to Inside Crime the Experts. In this series, we'll bring you updates on what is making news in the world of crime. Our experts will take you inside some of the most challenging crimes and mysteries. Many of these are unsolved. They're the stories of serial killers, murders, organised crime, disappearances, scams, frauds and heists. And now to our experts. Tim Watson-Munro is Australia's leading criminal psychologist. He's delved into the minds and crimes of some of the most notorious criminals in Australia and from around the globe. Dr. Xanthi Mallett is a world-renowned criminologist and she's Associate Professor of Criminology at the Central Queensland University. And I'm Duncan McNabb. I started my life of crime as a detective in policing, moved into major criminal defence in the corporate sector before heading to the media as an investigative journalist, author and TV producer. First up, some news. Back in our very first episode, we covered the bizarre story of Greg Lynn, the former airline pilot who went to trial last year, 2024, for the murder of Russell Hill and Carol Clay in Victoria in 2020. The murder happened after an alleged dispute at a campsite in Victoria's Alpine country. I say alleged because we only have Lynn's story. He did quite a job on the crime scene and the remains of his two victims. In June 2024, he was convicted for the murder of Carol Clay, but acquitted for the murder of Russell Hill. Lynn got 32 years. He's always proclaimed his innocence, and the hearing for leave to appeal, not an appeal, leave to appeal, will be heard in Melbourne on the 31st of October. We'll update you as that progresses. And now to a blessing scam. In episode 7, we talked about the woman in Qatar who'd been persuaded to send her bosses, and he was the former Prime Minister of Qatar, his jewel collection, including a $35 million pink diamond, to a bloke in the United States to have them cleansed of evil spirits. It was, of course, a complete con. Now there is an international gang targeting older Chinese women, telling them their valuables like cash and jewellery are the cause of their misfortunes, but that can be cured with a blessing. The valuables, of course, disappear or are replaced with cheap copies, or in some cases, even just a bag full of water bottles and other such stuff. And the misfortunes of the women, of course, worsen. This gang has been operating in Asia, Canada, and the US, particularly in San Francisco, and now in Australia, basically anywhere with a large Chinese population. These bastards usually fly in, do their dreadful deeds, and fly out again. Fear of shame often precludes reports to the police, but there are some anecdotal suggestions that the scammers netted in the last couple of years $100 million. But there is some good news. In Australia, there have been some arrests, and some of these culprits have their faces now on wanted list. Last news, Erin Patterson. This is the person who has been convicted now of the murders of Don and Gail Patterson, Heather Wilkinson, and the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson after 6 days of jury deliberation. This is the case that has gone around the world, the poisoned mushrooms, death cap mushrooms, in a beef Wellington she served to these poor people. It'll be the feature of our next episodes, but now to Tim and Xanthi for a few preliminary thoughts on the case. Over to you.
Over to you, Doctor.
Oh, where to start with Erin Patterson? So, interestingly, we saw a video, didn't we, Tim, of her police interview just a few days ago, which was really quite an eye-opener. I think it really showed her personality. She was calm. She definitely thought she had the measure of the police. She chose not to have a lawyer present. She showed no sympathy, empathy towards two people she just found out had died. So yeah, very interesting to see that. And obviously the jury saw that too. And I think it would have been highly impactful. It really spoke to her mindset in literally the days after the murders.
Yeah. I made the comment at the time that the thing that struck me most was the complete lack of affect.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing there. It was like, two people who who you profess to love. Later in the interview, she talks about, they were my only family. Mm-hmm. Why would I want to kill them?
And I loved, past tense, loved them.
Deadpan, affect, nothing. And that struck me a lot. And it seemed to me that this was a police record of interview that she'd probably role-played in her head many, many, many times before, in anticipation of being wheeled in. And when it stuck to the script, she was in control, but the police, clever, well-experienced police, got her off balance. Mm-hmm. When she was off script, that's when it started to unravel for her, I thought.
The cops did a really good job, what you would expect of coppers who know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They've got her in, they've got information they know is going to really cause a lot of grief. They sit her down. She does this I agree, very controlled interview with them. She's got it all worked out in her head,
Yep.
except she hasn't got it worked out at all. She's planned the crime, but she hasn't planned the exit terribly well. And she sits down and they ask her two questions that really stuck me. The first two big lies. Have you ever had a dehydrator? Oh,
I
no.
love that bit. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
And
Have you ever foraged for mushrooms?
exactly,
No.
bingo. And the cops know that she's had a dehydrator because they've got CCTV of her taking it to a tip after the lunch and getting rid of it.
And
that's
they've
fine.
got the manual.
Well,
Oh,
I might have had one, but it's so long ago.
and she diverts. Did
I
you
collect
notice?
manuals, but not hardware.
The first two big lies of the case, two of many, I might say, and it starts to unravel there. And that's that lovely moment for the cops when you know
Oh, it was beautiful. Because
you've
did
got
you
to
notice?
bang onto rights.
Did you notice the way they set her up with the do you have a dehydrator? Have you ever been foraging? And then there was like a gap. They lulled her into a false sense of security. Then they started talking about the exhibits. And you saw her face change. So she started blinking madly. And you could see her kind of thinking, what am I going to say now? And she immediately tried to distract and move to a different type of food processor. Do you remember? She made, and it's almost like she's just like, oh, look over here. Ignore the red
Well, the look
flag
over here was, I like to cook from scratch. It's a passion of mine. Look, I might have gone out, I might have done that, but what's all the fuss about? Because I really love them.
Mm. Yeah, and then a couple of days later, which is something that always struck me, she then gives a doorstop interview to the media,
Oh,
which is one we've seen everywhere. She's standing outside her red car in the front of the house, and she gives this beautifully contrived interview where she says, "I'm devastated." I think she was devastated on four separate times, so we're getting the message very clearly. But she
she
then
wants us to
gets the
know she's
names wrong.
devastated.
Yeah, and Don is fighting for life. Well,
Except
Don was dead.
Don was dead at that point.
Yeah, she's got the cast wrong.
I know. And it's funny, it's almost like she got out of the car, prepped for her performance, like wound up, pretending to cry, although the lack of actual tears was a bit of a hole in her performance. But she'd prepped herself, she'd wound herself up, she got out of the car and she's like, this is my moment. But when I saw it, I thought, error, you should not have given that press.
He wasn't going to let her get from the car to the front door without a grab, and
She didn't want to,
grab
though.
it was.
She was loving it. To me, she was enjoying the attention.
This is the true crime aficionado, and she's obsessed by true crime. It was at day one of the trial, and we're thinking, 90% she's gone, 90%. And then that morning, we're down to 60-40, thinking, will she be acquitted? Half a chance.
Clearly, the jury didn't believe her.
Yes, on that Monday afternoon at 2:15, when we all raced back into the courtroom, in my case to the media room, the jury came back and it was guilty, guilty, guilty. And she was utterly emotionless.
Yeah, again, no affect. At some level, I mean, I didn't examine her, but generically speaking, people are looking at a life sentence, even with protests of innocence, at some level they must workshop in their head the possibility of a finding of guilt.
Do you reckon she did, though? I reckon she's so arrogant and thinks she's so clever and so convincing. I mean, she took the stand. That was probably an error in the end, the way she handled Cross. So I reckon she thought she'd got away with it. She thought she could convince the cops. She thought she could convince the press, the public. I think she thought she had the jury nailed too.
Well, I think on that, Colin Mandy, SC, did an amazing job with her defence.
They got it right, absolutely spot on. Just to go back to your point, is to whether she'd get away with it, and it may be tangential, but in the couple of days before, when the jury went out, and they were out for 6 days from memory, someone has gone back and put plastic all around the front of the Gibson Street house to keep the media away. So in the back of my mind was Erin thinking that she would be able to go home that night, but didn't want the prying eyes of the media. Hence the black plastic wrap of the house, which is gone, by the way. The plastic wrap has disappeared.
What about the sentencing hearing? I'm still intrigued to know whether or not she's been psychiatrically and/or psychologically evaluated, because that will give some great clues about her mental state. My intuition, in fact, Xanth and I have talked about this, most likely not, but wait and see, yeah?
Yeah, I think, and it's on in Melbourne. It's in Melbourne. Fortunately, we don't have to go to Morwell. It's on the 25th, 26th of August. So in our next episode, we can come back. That'll be well and truly done by that stage, so we can canvass exactly what has happened to her. It's been foreshadowed that there'll be victims' impact statements, quite a lot of them, because she's destroyed so many lives. Um, Sorry, she's just damaged so many lives. So lots of victims' impact statements, which is utterly appropriate. And Mandy, there was some, and it was one of the, one of these throwaway lines you get in a court case. I suspect Mandy will have something to say, but we don't know what it's going to be. So stay tuned, 25, 26, set down for 2 days, and that's purely the submissions on sentence. So
Mhm.
when we next gather, we can chat about that in some detail, I think, and go
What
through.
tends to happen with murder cases, the average person charged with murder, um, they're normally evaluated by a shrink, psychiatrist and or psychologist, proximal to the event for very good reasons. It gives the defence some idea of possible defences. It gives them an idea of how that person was functioning close to the event.
They could still determine if she had a personality disorder, for example, that would have been in existence at the time. You can't say how that would have been expressing, but if she, and I'm not saying, she's borderline or whatever, but if she were diagnosed with a personality disorder like borderline, that would have been in existence at the time.
She's 50 years of age. Inevitably, she'll get a life sentence. The real issue is how much on the bottom, if anything at all.
Which is probably a natural segue onto the joys of Jack the Ripper.
That's one way of putting it.
Always
Joys of Jack
cheerful
the Ripper.
speaking with you, Duncan.
Yeah, we always have the most enlightening and enlifting chats.
Tell us about Jack.
Yeah.
And now to our featured story, the serial killer Jack the Ripper. There are 5 victims strongly believed to have been Ripper killings, and probably a few more. All the victims were prostitutes working in the dank lanes and seedy pubs around Whitechapel near London's docks. The first to die was Mary Ann Nichols on the 31st of August 1888. She died from multiple stab wounds. There were mutilations. Next was Annie Chapman, strangled and again mutilated. Then came Elizabeth Stride, whose throat was slashed, and it was probable that Jack was disturbed before mutilating her. Catherine Eddowes also died that same night, mutilated, again stabbed, and body parts removed. It was just utterly vicious. The last victim was on the 18th of November 1888, and that was Mary Jane Kelly, again mutilated, horrific attack on her, even to the point that he removed her heart and took it away. Each murder apparently had one signature. It was their throats were cut from left to right. In the generations since, there have been many, many suspects, from people living in the poorhouse to, in fact, Buckingham Palace, all put forward by people and pundits who have reckoned they've cracked the case. But of course, they haven't. That's why it still remains a mystery. Among those who've claimed that they've solved Jack the Ripper include famous crime writer Patricia Cornwell, who wrote a book a couple of years back called Jack the Ripper Case Closed, and pointed the finger at painter Walter Sickert. But that was more bravado than anything else, and the case remains open. Now a bloke called Russell Edwards, a ripperologist, which are people who claim to have expertise in the case, but they don't appear to have much expertise in the very many facets of criminal investigations. He reckons that a Polish immigrant and barber called Aaron Kosminski is Jack the Ripper, and he's got DNA to prove it. But does he? This DNA purportedly comes from a shawl allegedly found beside the victim, Catherine Eddowes. The shawl was kept allegedly by a police officer for many years, and he reckons that contemporary technology, as recent as this year, has cracked the case. But is he right? Over to our experts, Tim and Xanthi.
I just wonder about contamination of the scarf. How much other DNA would be on a scarf like that, would you say, Dan?
Oh, how many people have handled that over the years? Contamination would be a huge issue. I mean, has it not been washed since the 1800s? I just wonder
Oh,
where it's been stored, like who's touched it. How would you demonstrate that the DNA that was lifted was actually the perpetrators? I mean, how would you draw that link?
yeah, being my pedantic self too, how do we actually prove conclusively that the shawl was in fact Catherine Eddowes and it was in fact
Yep,
found beside her body on the night she was
yep,
murdered?
yep. We
The
can't.
basics aren't in place.
Where's the chain of custody, for example, that we would need to demonstrate that?
Yeah, and as we all know from these sorts of things, the DNA evidence is compelling, but it doesn't necessarily mean the science of the DNA is fabulous, but it's actually how the DNA sample got
Exactly,
first
And
place.
right?
again, this is not a sledge because you work in
Oh,
Queensland now, but DNA in Queensland takes a fair while to be analysed with
oh,
errors.
yeah. There's all sorts of problems at the lab, contamination. We're talking with modern technologies, there are all
Yeah.
sorts of issues. Then you add in the complications of things like people who are preferential shedders. And for our listeners, that's somebody, so say, I don't know if I am, but if I'm a preferential shedder, I could give Tim a hug. Tim could then go to a scene and leave my DNA there. Now, that would demonstrate that I'd been at that scene if you didn't understand the
Mm.
shedding process, the transfer process. So just because somebody's DNA is on something, it doesn't mean that they touched it.
Where
So
does the term ripperologist come from?
It's
Is it
made,
sort of
well, Ripper is just obviously Jack the Ripper. Ology just means study of. So it's just one of those made up terms, I think. You
no, no, he's
study.
he's parading himself in a
Oh,
grandiose
yeah,
way.
he's not the only one who's called himself that. Anyone who purports to have expertise in the Ripper crimes may describe themselves as a Ripperologist.
they all seem to suffer from that thing that we discuss regularly, confirmation bias. They get a
Mm-hmm.
theory that they love, like Patricia
Mm-hmm.
Cole, for example, and they pursue that theory, not really casting their mind to other opportunities. So, that's the person I want to chase. This is why we've got them.
And
Well,
you
good
know
luck
what?
with
With
that.
archaeological cases, somebody can say, "Oh, I've solved it," because there's no implication, there's no outcome. Nobody's going to go to prison. So, it's safer to make these wild, largely unsubstantiated claims because nobody can prove you wrong, but equally, you certainly can't prove that you're right.
Yeah, and there's a quirk I noticed just looking at some of the research on this Russell Edwards assertions that it's came from the shore. In February of this year, in the middle of all this, when it was popping up yet again, New Scientist magazine, which I think is fairly credible, there's an article suggesting that they went back to the gentleman concerned and asked for proof of the DNA sequencing so they could walk their way
Mhm.
through it. And apparently that's disappeared.
How can it disappear?
That's
DNA
very
sequencing doesn't disappear.
well, that's all got a bit of a mystery, apparently. New Scientists, I think, published something. We went back to him, but apparently there's been a data issue and they can't provide the proof to support his case. That's
Hmm.
what New Scientists have published. There might be, of course, a different story. But the fundamental thing I always thought, this is what we just talked about, the DNA sample might be intriguing, but it's how it got there in the first place. And that chain of evidence from Catherine Eddowes through to this bloke in London now, with a shawl which he bought at auction, by the way, as well.
Oh
So,
my God.
yeah,
So
good
we've no
luck.
idea of the provenance of the
Oh,
shawl.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
it's a
is
great headline.
it even the right shore?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. The provenance. How do you prove the provenance? Well, a copper picks it up from a body in 1888 and keeps it pristine
But we don't
condition.
know that it was hers.
No, we don't know anything.
This is in a back alley in the like Whitechapel,
Yeah.
London. It's just, how would we know that it? I mean, it's possible. Did they have a family member of Kathleen Eddowes that they did a familial match to?
Hmm.
How
And
did
as
they
you're
determine
talking about
this?
shedders, did Mr. Kosminski bump into Catherine Eddowes in a pub one night?
Or, I mean, also, let's add in the slight complication here that she was, in fact, a sex worker. So,
Hmm.
how many people's DNA would she have come into contact with on a regular basis? Now, they wouldn't have washed their clothes as often. So, if you looked at any of her items of clothing, it could say that he came into contact with her, fine, but it doesn't mean it was the murder. It could have been that evening, it could have been the week before, a month before, and that's, considering if it's in fact her shawl in the first place.
And that just prompts a thought of mine, as we always have when we do these things, is was there any other DNA found on them?
Oh, if there wasn't,
As a
there's
sex
something
worker.
really, really wrong, isn't there?
Yeah.
If the victim's DNA and the perpetrator's DNA are the only DNA that are found from the 1880s,
Hmm.
then I have some serious questions.
Yeah. It's really problematic. Yet another Ripper suspect that someone's been pushing, but it seems to have, well, it's intriguing, but it doesn't seem to have much weight.
Well, that's always the way, though, isn't it? I mean, it's one we'd all love to see solved because there's still families waiting. I mean, long distant families, but families waiting to know what happened because these are really brutal, awful crimes, and it would be great to have an answer. But I just don't think that this is the solution.
No, and there are so many other potential suspects that we've talked about before. The chap who
Mm.
H.H. Sorry.
Oh, now you got to love H.H. Holmes in the darkest possible way. So, for our listeners who don't know, his name was Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or better known as H.H. Holmes, and he was an American con artist in essence and serial killer. He was active just after Jack the Ripper, so 1891 to 1894. Was executed in 1896, and by then he had a very long criminal history. It was mostly insurance fraud. He'd done some forgery, etc. He'd had a number of bigamous marriages, and he's known to have murdered, I think it's at least 9 people, but they suspect anywhere from 16 to 27 or even more. So he's a particularly interesting character, and there's a great book about him as well, H.H. Holmes. But some people think because of the types of crimes he committed later, his style of murder, he could be a suspect for the Jack the Ripper crimes.
And there's another one closer to home, back in that what has become the quirky crime capital of Australia, taking the crown from Adelaide. We go to Melbourne, and the bloke that fascinated me for years, Frederick Bailey Deeming, a,
Oh, Deeming.
a global serial killer at a time of sale. And this is a bloke, just as a fast background, came to Australia from the UK with his family back in the 1800s. Got into terrible strife in Sydney, a fraudster, a con man, a Lothario. Fled Australia very, very quickly, slightly in front of the cops, went back to the UK. He had a wife and 4 kids. He murdered them at a place called, I think, Rainhill, somewhere in the Midlands near Liverpool. He murdered them, buried them under the floor of the house he was renting using a fake name, a terrible con man. Then seduced a young woman with some money, and at their wedding, she was bigamist as well as murderer, they danced the wedding, one of the bridal waltz on the floor under which his family were buried. He then comes to Australia, and he then persuades the new wife that they need to go to Australia. They come to Australia. They move into a cute little house in Windsor in Melbourne, which is still there. Hadn't knocked on the door yet, but I did go past. Bumps the wife off and buries her in the fireplace. A couple of weeks later, and it's summer in Melbourne, so it's getting quite.
Oh.
Whereabouts in Windsor? Being
Uh,
a Melbourne guy from time to time.
It's a cute little terrace house in Windsor on a side street. I could take you there. I think the landlord gets a bit suspicious, so there's an unpleasant smell in the
It
house.
would be.
Deeming by this time has done a runner yet again. He's got her jewels and bits and pieces. He's pawned those. He's I think he's using multiple false names. He bumps into another nice young lady in Sydney and says, "Come with me to Western Australia. We can have a fabulous life together." But he's quite the charmer. He goes to Western Australia. The cops eventually get on the case, and they do a great job. They lock this bloke up in Western Australia for murder. They bring him back to Melbourne. He has a trial. He's represented by Alfred Deakin, who later became Prime Minister. And at the time, we've got a bit here, at the time of his arrest, I'm just casting my eyes on this, the newspapers reported April 1892, Deeming has confessed to his lawyer and doctors who examined him that he committed the majority of the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel district of London. The police also apparently said it is possible that Deeming is telling the truth, but later dismissed the theory because kicking around there are a number of people saying that he was either in South Africa or in prison in the UK at the time of the murders. But it would suggest, a bit of recent research suggests that might be bullshit. In fact, he was about, and he had a brother in London, so he was possibly loitering in Whitechapel.
But they
Good
love this,
suspect.
don't they? He's a very similar character to H.H. Holmes. If anyone wants to look him up, because he claimed the other 27 killings, only 8 are confirmed though, and 1 is considered probable, so that's 9 others. But they love taking credit for these high profile crimes. It's all about the ego.
Once the roost is up, right? They want the notoriety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they might as well claim it, right? They've got nothing to lose.
So I suppose that takes us back to the suspects for the Jack the Ripper murders are numerous, but I suspect that all these years later, almost 140 odd years later, chances of us solving the case are probably about 0.
I mean, what would it take to solve it? Even if there was a confession letter, lots of people have confessed, right? We've just heard of 2, Deeming and Holmes. They both confessed to, or certainly Deeming confessed and Holmes has been linked. You know, other people have confessed over the years. We know about false confessions anyway. So how would we get enough evidence, substantial forensic evidence, to link anyone to any of the victims? You know, what still exists? I can't think how that would be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
Here's one. the eminent criminologist. Do you think he would have been caught using today's technology if it had existed?
Yeah, I do. I think that I don't think that there are less serial killers now. I just think we catch them earlier. I think there's more technology, better investigative techniques. Police understand more about serial crime than they did. And I think all of that together, the sharing of information, you know, I'm wearing a smartwatch that would map it. Like if I died, you could go to Garmin and you would know exactly when my heart stopped beating. You would see the pattern of heart rate go up. You'd know if I was attacked, when, and my heart stop. You could see it, and you could see exactly where I was when it happened.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's amazing. So much data is captured so much of the time. I think it would be very difficult in a place like London, probably possible in other cities. You know, I'm thinking, you know, third world countries, for example, where you don't have that technology. But in London, yeah, I think we're catching serial killers more quickly for a number of reasons. And I don't think he would have got away with that many now if it happened
And
now.
London particularly is rich in CCTV.
You know, everyone's filming everything all the
Yeah.
time, right? There's CCTV everywhere. They would have had mobile phones on them. Oh, there's just so much that would have been captured. They would have known exactly who they were meeting with, who their clients were. So, yeah, I don't think it could happen now. And I just think we catch them sooner.
So word to prospective serial killers, think
Don't. Yeah, and you think like somebody like Erin Patterson who thinks she's so smart, right? She's had years to plan this. We know that she was planning it for years. She collected the mushrooms years in advance and dehydrated them. And yet very poorly executed out strategy, right? So she thinks she's super clever, but they have to go up against all of the police who are highly seasoned, experienced detectives, and all of the experts that the police can bring to bear, which is basically anyone on any topic. Now, I don't know that anybody could be clever enough to outthink not only the police force, but all of the experts. You know, I think that is really a challenge these days, for which I am particularly grateful.
We're all being watched. What happened to Deeming?
Deeming had a very unfortunate end. Deakin represented him. He was found guilty quite swiftly. And in those days, executions were quite swiftly afterwards. Appeal processes were brief, if nothing else. He was convicted, sentenced to death, hung in Old Melbourne Jail, buried in Old Melbourne Jail. But years and years later, it's probably in the last decade or so, when they were excavating Old Melbourne Jail and doing some archaeological stuff, they found a skull which they believe was that of Ned Kelly.
That's true.
They did some DNA testing and it was actually old Fred, not
Oh,
Ned.
interesting. Did they do a reconstruction of his face?
I think they did actually, yeah. And
Because
it
they can
turned
do that for
Frederick
DNA.
Deeming.
It's
Interesting.
a fascinating afternoon out for those in Melbourne and those who visit Melbourne. You can catch the City Circle tram for free. If you go to the Old Melbourne Jail, they've still got the death masks that they used to make. So before people were hung, they would get a sort of plaster Paris, I think it was, mold of the face, and the death mask would be put in the cell where the person had been lodged on
I
execution.
thought it was after they'd been hung. I thought
Well,
they
it
did it
may be.
post-mortem.
They certainly weren't decomposing.
No. I thought it was fresh post-mortem. I thought it
Yes,
was
you're
immediately.
probably right, Seth. Yeah.
I actually think Deeming's death mask, and I may have this wrong, I think he was Deeming's death mask left Australia and is now in the Black Museum at Scotland Yard. And just as a quirk, he's also immortalised in wax at Madame Tussauds in London.
Well, he got the infamy he craved, didn't he?
So, what do you reckon? Do you think Jack the Ripper can ever be solved?
I don't think so. I don't think we'll ever know for absolutely sure. We're going to obviously hear about a lot more suspects. You know, it's a story that never stops giving, isn't it?
It'll never be solved, but it'll never die.
Mm.
And continues to create ripperologists, people that want to talk about it. I just think it's too long ago, you know, in terms of the evidence, the um, destruction of evidence, the unraveling of evidence, the lack of technology at the time. So I would say at this point of time, Jack got away with it.
I would agree. And Patterson didn't, because we do have all of these technologies now. We have toxicology. We have the ability to identify tiny bits of death cap mushroom spores in a dehydrator. We have CCTV. We've got phone records, computer records. So she got caught because of the time in which she chose to commit her crimes, and that's exactly the same reason why Jack the Ripper got away with it.
I think Patterson's case will be talked about for a very long time.
Absolutely.
It'll be used in universities.
It already is. It
Yep.
already is. A female mass murderer, very unusual. She's, my heart goes out to the families because, as Duncan said at the beginning, so many people have been damaged by this.
The other thing I was going to say is the way that, getting back to police investigations, it will obviously be the template for how to investigate and prosecute a complex criminal matter. Hats off to the police. They did an extraordinary job.
They had to get all their ducks in a row, as it were. It was a very well managed investigation. Very little information came out there, and that frustrated people because they wanted to know what was happening. However, they kept it tight, close, did a great job, and ultimately got the right result. So just because the media, they're not talking to the media and they're not sharing, doesn't mean nothing is happening. So that's the mistake a lot of people make.
And what they don't factor in, because they've never done this sort of stuff before, is that the cops eventually have to get reasonable cause to suspect so they can arrest somebody. That is a massive undertaking. But they've also got to be pretty confident when they take their case to court that it's going to stand up, because the punters who don't comment on why it's taking so long, that copper has got to stand in that witness box and give evidence and be cross-examined by some of the smartest people in this country. And that evidence has got to be sufficient to persuade the people sitting in the jury box.
And you get one shot at that, really.
Exactly. And the moment you stumble, the moment someone puts a hole in what you've done, your case might crumble.
Reasonable doubt. One bad witness, one piece of evidence that, you don't have that chain of custody. I've seen cases fall over on the smallest things. If reasonable doubt is entered into the equation, you're done.
Yeah. So you take your time. It's painstaking.
They had the opportunity to take their time, do it properly, and ultimately they did.
And it's why the jury came back decisively.
And 6.5 days, actually, given the amount of evidence, they had 6 weeks of evidence, or was it even longer than that? To go through
10 or 11 weeks.
It was a lot. It was a lot, wasn't it? They had to go through all of that. So 6.5 days to go through that was not a lot of time. They did their job properly. They considered it all. And obviously,
if I was wearing a hat, I'd take it off to the jury.
Yeah. Very impressive.
12 average people dragged into one of the most extraordinary cases in our history.
Yeah.
A case of global attention. And they've had to wade through. And I mean, some of the evidence I listened to, you want to nod off. It has to be given to them. But Jesus Christ, some of the technical evidence.
Yeah, exactly. They've got to figure all of that out, weight that evidence. Yeah. So they did an amazing job. So
I don't think we'll ever know why.
Motive is elusive. And what bugs me about it is that she sat those people down, 2 people she purportedly loved, 2 people that she didn't have a close relationship with, who were dragged in for the lunch, and she sat there and watched them eat mouthful by mouthful,
knowing how awful a death that was going to be. It's torturous. Your organs start to, we won't go into, death cap mushrooms has 4 different toxins in it. It's horrendous. And she is capable of watching people she purported to care about.
Thanks, Xanthi and Tim. In our next episode, we'll be taking you inside the Erin Patterson murder by beef Wellington case. Thanks everyone for watching Inside Crime the Experts. We'll be back soon with some more. See you next time, and please like our channel and please subscribe.